I would say overall of my career, this is in my top 5 that I remember. It continued to get worse. I saw an elderly black female laying in a bed. She was laying on her back. There was no sheet on this bed. It was one of the plastic mattresses like you see in a hospital. There was no sheet on the bed. She had on a white T-shirt. She had vomited at some point, and the vomit was still on the T-shirt. Again, the smell of urine was rough, and it being hot in that house, it just made it 10 times worse. When I looked at the patient's ankle and looked at the injury that we were called out on, it was a compound ankle fracture, so the bone was sticking out of the skin. I remember as I looked and assessed the patient, the bed had urine in it, and it had been there long enough that it had turned colors. It was brown. It was rough to even look at. The 10 years that I had been on the ambulance, that was one of the roughest scenes that I had witnessed at that point.
In a harrowing case of neglect and abuse, siblings Karen and Michael Murray have been found guilty of first-degree murder and aggravated neglect of their mother, Sheila Murray.
When asked to describe her mother to us, Sonya Henry told us that her mother was funny. She was strict. She was a good cook. She was famous for her fried chicken. But above all, she was a good mom.
The indictment spans the period between April 4, 2019, and August 10, 2019, during which Sheila endured severe neglect leading to her death.
In 2015, Sheila Murray suffered a stroke, and as her health declined, it began to affect her independence, her ability to care for herself. And the more that she was unable to care for herself, the more she relied on her children.
As they face potential life sentences without parole, the court proceedings have unveiled the appalling conditions Sheila lived in, marked by extreme heat and the overwhelming stench of urine and feces.
Saying to her daughter Karen, "Please take care of me." By 2019, Sheila Murray had become completely and utterly dependent on her children for not only her medications, her medical care, but for basic hygiene. And we now know that she was completely and utterly failed by the two people who should have cared the most.
Despite arguments from the defense that the siblings were overwhelmed and unaware of the extent of their neglect, the jury concluded that Karen and Michael's failure to provide adequate care resulted in their mother's tragic demise. Karen and Michael Murray have been found guilty of first-degree murder and aggravated neglect of their mother.
For their actions and inactions, these two defendants are charged with murder in the first degree, aggravated neglect of a vulnerable adult, the aggravated neglect of a vulnerable adult resulting in serious bodily injury, and the aggravated neglect of a vulnerable adult with serious physical harm.
The case revealed horrific conditions in Sheila Murray's home. Paramedics described finding Sheila in a dire state, covered in dried feces and with a severe ankle fracture.
Compound ankle fracture, so the bone was sticking out of the skin.
Sonya Henry, another sibling, believed Karen and Michael tried to care for their mother but were overwhelmed.
Yeah, they would try to do what they could around the house and things when she was still mostly able to take care of herself. I guess I felt that way because I knew that they probably couldn't give her the care that she needed.
The prosecution detailed the extreme neglect, while the defense argued that the siblings did not knowingly neglect Sheila. Ultimately, the jury found Karen and Michael guilty, highlighting the tragic and preventable nature of Sheila Murray's death due to neglect. In a shocking turn of events, a Tennessee jury has found two siblings guilty of murder due to the severe neglect of their mother, which ultimately led to her death.
Sheila Murray suffered at the hands of her own children. They are guilty as charged.
Sheila Murray and her husband Edwin Tony Murray lived at 1405 Watauga Avenue in Johnson City, Tennessee, where they raised their 3 children, Karen, Sonya, and Michael. Sonya Henry remembers her mother fondly, describing her as funny, strict, and an excellent cook, known especially for her famous fried chicken.
She, big lady. She was happy. She was a very strict parent, but she was a good parent. She was very funny. She knew no stranger when we were out and about. She just liked to talk to people, and she was a great cook.
However, tragedy struck in 2015 when Sheila suffered a stroke. As her health declined, she lost her independence and ability to care for herself. She relied heavily on her children, pleading with her daughter Karen to take care of her. Despite this, her children failed to provide the necessary care, leading to her untimely death. The jury's verdict is a grim reminder of the responsibilities we owe to our loved ones, especially in their most vulnerable times. A Tennessee jury has convicted siblings Karen and Michael Murray of first-degree murder, aggravated neglect of a vulnerable adult, and multiple counts of aggravated neglect resulting in serious bodily injury and physical harm.
These 2 defendants are charged with murder in the first degree, aggravated neglect of a vulnerable adult, aggravated neglect of a vulnerable adult resulting in serious bodily injury, and the aggravated neglect of a vulnerable adult with serious physical harm.
The siblings were found guilty of severely neglecting their mother, Sheila Murray, leading to her tragic death. The mother of Karen and Michael. In 2015, Sheila suffered a stroke that severely impacted her speech and mobility. Over the years, her condition worsened, rendering her bedbound and fully dependent on her children for care. Despite this, Karen and Michael failed to provide the necessary care. Witnesses in the trial identified both defendants as responsible for the unlawful death of Sheila Murray. She needed constant care due to her deteriorating health, but her children neglected her needs, ultimately leading to her untimely death. On August 10, 2019, a 911 call was made reporting a possible broken leg from a fall. The call was treated as non-emergency, meaning no lights and sirens, and sounded casual. "Hey, my mom fell. Can you just come check her out?"
That particular call, one being the smell of the house and the heat that was in the house that day, the other being the injury to the patient. I would say overall of my career, this is in my top 5 that I remember. We were dispatched out routine traffic on a fall that had happened about a week ago. No lights, no sirens. When we got there and we got out of the truck, and as we were making our way into the home, I was met, 2 people that were in the house. I was met by an elderly black male and a black female.
However, when EMTs and paramedics arrived, they discovered the horrific condition of Sheila Murray.
The elderly male, when he first approached me, he said that they were doing the best they could. He kept emphasizing that they were doing the best they could with what they had. It continued to get worse. As I was continuing to get information, we were going down the hall back that way to the patient's room, and my partner steps out and says, "You need to get in here." And I asked him what was going on, and he said, "Well, go in and look at her ankle." He said, go in and look at her ankle. I saw an elderly black female laying in a bed. She was laying on her back. There was no sheet on this bed. She had vomited at some point, and the vomit was still on the T-shirt. Again, the smell of urine was rough, and it being hot in that house, it just made it 10 times worse.
The responders saw a severe injury to Sheila's ankle and were appalled by the disgusting conditions she was living in.
When I looked at the patient's ankle and looked at the injury that we were called out on, it was a compound ankle fracture, so the bone was sticking out of the skin. I remember as I looked and assessed the patient, the bed had urine in it, and it had been there long enough that it had turned colors. It was brown. The patient had fecal matter on her, had fecal matter around her ankle. It was rough to even look at. The 10 years that I had been on the ambulance, that was one of the roughest scenes that I had witnessed at that point. Just the out and out neglect.
What started as a non-emergency call quickly escalated, and Sheila was rushed to the hospital. Despite medical intervention, she succumbed to her injuries. This case isn't about premeditated murder but about two people, Karen and Michael Murray, who had a duty and responsibility to care for their mother. Instead, they allowed her condition to deteriorate, leading to severe neglect. Sheila's breast, foot, and other body parts were left to rot, ultimately causing her death. This tragic outcome resulted from their failure to fulfill their obligation to care for a vulnerable adult. Michael Murray admitted to Agent Pritchard that he and his sister Karen were the primary caregivers for their mother, Sheila Murray, acknowledging her need for constant care. Siblings Karen Murray, 49, and Michael Murray, 43, were found guilty of first-degree murder and aggravated neglect of a vulnerable adult in the death of their 68-year-old mother. Prosecutors stated that Sheila died due to the neglect and abuse by her children. In August 2019, Sheila was admitted to the hospital and subsequently passed away, prompting an investigation by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. The investigation revealed that Karen and Michael were responsible for the conditions that led to their mother's death. Now, her two children stand accused of her murder. Both siblings face a potential sentence of life in prison without parole when they are sentenced on September 30, 2024.